yourself and proceed.
I am Matt Nunn. I represent Senate District 17, and I'm just an all-around good guy.
Call the question, call the question. Roll call.
Make a motion.
I have prepared remarks because this is kind of a wonky policy bill, and I kind of nerd out on it a little bit. So I can go on and on forever about this topic if I don't kind of constrain myself to some remarks. So for the interest of time, I've done that. Senate Bill 183 focuses on one thing: transparency and accountability on proxy voting advice, particularly when that advice is provided to institutional investors and ultimately affects how companies are governed. Proxy advisors are firms paid to provide research, ratings, and recommendations on how shareholders should vote on corporate matters. Things like board elections, executive compensation, mergers or corporate restructuring, auditor selection, and very importantly, shareholder proposals. While most Kentuckians will never personally hire a proxy advisor, the reality is these firms can influence votes tied to Kentuckians' retirement accounts, pension investments, mutual funds, and institutional portfolios. And that's why this bill matters. It protects the investments of all Kentuckians that hold stock in publicly traded companies, as I would assume most people in this room do. If you have a 401k, you are invested in a publicly traded company. This bill is aimed at preventing three problems. First, is meant to prevent proxy voting recommendations from being made based on non-financial agendas. For example, social, political, or ideological interest, when those interests do not have a direct and material connection to the financial risk or financial return. These agendas often have a negative impact on a company's operation and thus the return for investors. Second, is meant to prevent situations where a proxy advisor pushes shareholders to support a shareholder proposal against the recommendation of the company's independent board, but does so without providing a written economic analysis of what it will cost, what it will do, and how it impacts shareholders. I want to pause right there to point something out. A company's independent board has a fiduciary responsibility to the company and its shareholders. Proxy advisors do not have that same fiduciary responsibility. That's why it's very important that we do this. And third, it's aimed at preventing inconsistent guidance where a proxy advisor provides materially different advice to different clients on the same proposal without transparency, without accountability. Senate Bill 183 also aligns closely with recent federal action. On December 11, 2025, the White House issued an executive order titled Protecting American Investors from Foreign-Owned and Politically Motivated Proxy Advisors. That executive order raises concerns that certain proxy advisory firms may use their outsized influence over proxy voting to push agendas that are politically motivated rather than financially motivated, and it directs increased federal oversight through agencies such as the SEC, FTC, and Department of Labor. This legislation reflects the same core principle at the state level. Proxy voting recommendations should be transparent, grounded in pecuniary factors, and accountable when they are not. Talking a little bit about the foreign-owned proxy advisor firms. There are two firms in particular, ISS and Glass Lewis. They are both foreign-owned firms, and they account for over 90% of proxy advising services in this country. So here's exactly what the bill does. It defines important terms clearly, such as pecuniary factors and non-pecuniary interests, as those ideological, political, environmental, or social interests that are not directly and materially tied to financial outcomes. The legislation then sets a clear standard. Proxy voting advice should be solely in the interest of shareholders. It requires an economic analysis when proxy advice conflicts with the independent board's recommendation. When a proxy advisor recommends support for a shareholder proposal in opposition to the independent board, the bill requires a written economic analysis showing the expected costs, benefits, and quantified impact on shareholder investment returns. It requires disclosure when a proxy advisor is giving advice that is not solely in shareholders' interest, potentially sacrificing investor returns. Lastly, it provides enforcement mechanisms whereby failure to comply is treated as a deceptive trade practice under Kentucky's consumer protection law. Let me also be clear about what this bill does not do. It does not prohibit proxy advisors from giving recommendations they believe are appropriate. It does not tell any investor how they must vote, and it does not require companies doing business in Kentucky to do anything. This legislation puts the transparency burden on the proxy advisors themselves. So in summary, this legislation requires truth of proxy advice. If a proxy advisor is using non-financial factors, this bill says disclose it clearly and back it up with economic analysis when appropriate. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll entertain questions.
Okay.